The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Carlin, Nevada, as Dawson Turner rode into town, his demons riding alongside him. The year was 1878, and though the war had been over for 13 years, the horrors Dawson had witnessed at Antietam still visited him nightly, turning his sleep into a waking hell from which he could find no escape. Dawson's weather-beaten face showed the marks of a man who'd seen too much in his 30 years. His once bright blue eyes had dulled to the color of a winter sky, and his dark brown hair carried streaks of premature gray beneath his worn Stetson. The townspeople of Carlin cleared a path as he made his way down the thoroughfare, his reputation as a skilled ranch hand and a man best left alone preceding him. He had come to Carlin seeking work at the Broken Spoke Ranch just outside town. Word was the owner, Henry Watts, needed experienced hands for the upcoming cattle drive to Sacramento. Dawson needed the work, but more importantly, he needed the exhaustion that came from 16-hour days in the saddle. Physical fatigue was the only thing that sometimes kept the nightmares at bay. "You must be Turner," a gruff voice called as Dawson hitched his horse outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. He turned to see a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard approaching. "I am," Dawson replied, his voice raspy from trail dust and limited use. "Henry Watts," the man said, extending a calloused hand. "Heard you might be coming. Also heard you're one of the best hands in the territory." Dawson shook the offered hand. "I work hard, Mr. Watts. Can't speak to being the best. Modest too," Watts chuckled. "Well, job's yours if you want it. Bunkhouse is 3 miles west, just follow the creek. You can start tomorrow." "Much obliged," Dawson nodded, retrieving his saddlebags from his horse. "I'll be there at first light." "One thing, Turner," Watts said, his expression turning serious. "My men don't cause trouble in town. We clear on that, Crystal," Dawson replied. "I'm not here for trouble, just work." Watts seemed satisfied with the answer and departed with a nod. Dawson exhaled slowly, feeling the exhaustion of his 3-day ride from Elko settling into his bones. He needed a drink, a hot meal, and a bed in that order. The Silver Dollar was like every other saloon Dawson had frequented throughout the West, a long bar of polished wood, tables filled with card players, working girls circulating among the patrons, and a small stage where a piano player hammered out a lively tune. He found an empty corner table and ordered whiskey and stew from a harried-looking barmaid. "New in town?" she asked as she set down his meal. "Just passing through," Dawson replied, the lie coming easily. He never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. The nightmares always found him eventually, driving him to move on before the locals started asking questions about his screams in the night. He ate methodically, not tasting the food, his eyes constantly scanning the room for threats that weren't there. Old habits from the war that he couldn't shake. When he'd finished his meal and several whiskeys, he asked about a room for the night. $2, the barmaid told him. "Up the stairs, last door on the left." Dawson paid, then made his way to the room, a sparse affair with a narrow bed and a washstand. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, removing his boots and gun belt. Sleep would come, and with it, the nightmares. The familiar dread settled over him like a shroud. He lay back, hat over his face, and waited for the inevitable. The dreams came as they always did, the thunder of cannon fire, the screams of dying men, the sickening smell of blood and powder. In his dream, he was back at Antietam Creek, watching as his younger brother Matthew fell, blood blossoming across his Union blue uniform. Dawson had enlisted to protect him, but in the end, he'd failed. The Confederate bullet meant for Dawson had found Matthew instead. Dawson woke with a strangled cry, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cool spring night. His heart hammered in his chest as he fought to orient himself. The room at the Silver Dollar, Carlin, 1878. Matthew was 13 years dead. He rose shakily and moved to the window, pushing it open to gulp the cool night air. As his breathing steadied, something unusual caught his attention, a sound floating on the night breeze. A voice. A woman's voice singing. The melody was haunting, unlike any song he'd heard in saloons or churches. It seemed to call to him personally, drawing him toward it like a moth to flame. Almost without conscious thought, Dawson pulled on his boots and gun belt and made his way downstairs. The saloon was nearly empty now, just a few drunks sleeping it off at tables. Outside, the night was clear, stars gleaming like diamond dust scattered across velvet. The singing continued, coming from somewhere behind the Main Street buildings. Dawson followed the sound, moving past darkened storefronts and down an alley, until he emerged into an open area near the creek that ran along the edge of town. There, sitting on a flat rock beside the water, was a young woman. Her back was to him, her long chestnut hair cascading down her back, catching silver highlights from the moonlight. Her simple dress was the color of prairie grass, and she seemed completely unaware of his presence as she sang to the night. Dawson stood transfixed, afraid to move lest he break the spell her voice was weaving. The song was in a language he didn't recognize, not Spanish or French or any tongue he'd encountered in his travels. Yet something about it resonated deep within him, calming the tremors that usually followed his nightmares. He must have made some small sound, for suddenly the singing stopped, and the woman turned sharply. Her eyes, wide with alarm, met his, and Dawson found himself staring into the most striking green eyes he'd ever seen. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I didn't mean to frighten you." The woman relaxed slightly, though wariness remained in her posture. "You're not from town," she said, her accent lilting but unplaceable. "Just arrived today," Dawson confirmed. "Dawson Turner. I heard you're singing from my room at the Silver Dollar." She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Lily Kerrigan," she offered finally. "Most folks don't wander out here at night. Most folks probably don't hear singing like that," Dawson replied. "What was that language?" A small smile played at the corners of her lips. "Old Irish. Songs my grandmother taught me." She tilted her head, examining him more carefully. "You look like a man who's seen ghosts, Mr. Turner." The accuracy of her observation startled him. "Just Dawson," he said, deflecting. "And we've all got ghosts, Miss Kerrigan." "Lily," she corrected. "And yes, we do, but yours seem to be riding you particularly hard tonight." Dawson shifted uncomfortably. How could this stranger see so clearly what he worked so hard to hide? "Why do you come out here to sing?" he asked, changing the subject. Lily looked back toward the water, moonlight silvering her profile. "The creek carries the songs away. Sometimes that's what songs need to be set free." There was something in her words that resonated with Dawson, though he couldn't have explained why. "It's late for a lady to be out alone," he observed. She laughed then, a sound as melodious as her singing. "Carlin isn't exactly a den of thieves, Dawson. Besides," she added, patting the pocket of her dress, "I'm not entirely defenseless." Dawson didn't doubt she carried a small pistol or blade. Women on the frontier learned to protect themselves or suffered the consequences. "Even so," he said, "may I walk you home?" Lily considered him for a moment, then nodded. "That would be kind, thank you." She rose gracefully from her perch by the water, and Dawson was struck by how small she was, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. Yet there was a quiet strength in her bearing that belied her size. "Do you live in town?" he asked as they began walking back toward the main street. "Just on the edge," she replied. "I teach at the schoolhouse and board with the Wilsons. They own the general store." A schoolteacher. It made sense. There was an educated quality to her speech, a precision that set her apart from the typical frontier woman. "How long have you been in Carlin?" "Almost a year now. I came west from Chicago after my parents died, needed a fresh start." She glanced up at him. "What brings you to our little corner of Nevada, Dawson?" "Work," he answered simply. "I'm starting at the Broken Spoke tomorrow. Cattle Drive coming up." They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant hooting of an owl. Dawson found himself strangely at ease with this woman he'd just met, a rare feeling for him these days. "This is me," Lily said eventually, stopping before a two-story clapboard house set back from the street. Lights still glowed in one downstairs window. "Thank you for the escort." "My pleasure," Dawson replied, tipping his hat. "Will you be singing by the creek again tomorrow night?" A small smile curved her lips. "Perhaps. Good night, Dawson Turner." "Good night, Lily Kerrigan." He watched until she was safely inside, then turned back toward the Silver Dollar. For the first time in years, Dawson felt something other than dread at the prospect of the remaining night hours. Something almost like anticipation. Morning came too soon, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as Dawson saddled his horse. He'd managed a few more hours of sleep after returning to his room, and remarkably, the nightmares had not returned. Instead, his dreams had been filled with a haunting melody and green eyes that seemed to see right through him. The Broken Spoke Ranch was exactly where Watts had described, a sprawling operation with a main house, bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings. About a dozen men were already at work as Dawson rode in, some mending fences while others tended to horses in the corral. Watts emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Turner, good, you're prompt. Let me introduce you to the foreman." He gestured to a lean, weathered man approaching from the corral. "This is Sam Cooper. He'll show you the ropes." Cooper sized Dawson up with a practiced eye. "Ever worked a drive to Sacramento before?" "Twice," Dawson confirmed. "Different outfit, but same route." Cooper nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good, we've got 3 weeks to get everything ready. We're driving 400 head this year." The next several days fell into a familiar routine for Dawson. Up before dawn, working with the herd or mending equipment until dusk, then a simple dinner in the bunkhouse before turning in. The work was physically demanding, exactly what he needed to exhaust his body. But each night, as the other hands settled into their bunks, Dawson found himself lying awake, listening, waiting. The bunkhouse was too far from town to hear Lily's singing, but knowing she might be at the creek filled him with a restless energy he hadn't felt in years. Finally, on his 4th night at the ranch, he could stand it no longer. After the bunkhouse had gone quiet with the snores of tired men, Dawson slipped out, saddled his horse, and rode back to Carlin. The town was mostly dark when he arrived, just a few lights burning in the saloon. He hitched his horse and made his way directly to the creek, hoping he wasn't too late or that she had even come at all. As he approached the spot where he'd first seen her, his heart sank. The flat rock by the water was empty, no sign of Lily anywhere. Dawson stood for a moment, feeling foolish. What had he expected? That a woman he'd met once would continue coming to this spot, singing into the darkness. He was about to turn back when he heard it faint at first, then clearer. Not by the water this time, but further along the bank, where a stand of cottonwood trees created a natural alcove. Dawson moved quietly in that direction, following the voice that had somehow worked its way into his dreams. There she was, sitting on a fallen log, her face tilted up to the stars as she sang. Tonight her song seemed sadder, the melody weaving a tale of loss that needed no translation to understand. Dawson stood at the edge of the trees, not wanting to interrupt but unable to leave. When the song ended, Lily lowered her gaze from the stars and spoke without turning. "I wondered if you might come back." Dawson stepped forward, no longer surprised by her apparent sixth sense. "How did you know it was me?" She turned then, a small smile playing on her lips. "I didn't for certain, but something told me you might return." He moved closer, sitting on the log beside her but maintaining a respectful distance. "That was beautiful, sad though. It's a lament," she explained. "For those lost at sea, my grandmother's brother was a fisherman who never returned from a storm." She studied him in the moonlight. "You look tired, Dawson. Long days at the ranch," he admitted, "getting ready for the drive." "But it's not just the work, is it?" she asked softly. "The ghosts still follow you." Dawson looked away, uncomfortable with her perception. "You ask a lot of questions, schoolteacher." "Occupational hazard," she replied lightly, "but I only ask because—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Because I think perhaps my singing helps with them. The ghosts, I mean." He glanced at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" Lily shrugged, a delicate movement in the moonlight. "The way you listened that first night, like a drowning man who'd found air." Her words hit uncomfortably close to the truth. Dawson had indeed found something in her singing that eased the constant pressure in his chest, the weight of memories he couldn't escape. But admitting that to her or himself seemed a dangerous step. "You're very observant," he said finally. "Teachers have to be," she replied. Then, changing tack, "Tell me about the cattle drive. When do you leave?" Grateful for the shift in conversation, Dawson explained the upcoming journey. We head out in about 2 weeks. It'll take nearly a month to reach Sacramento if the weather holds and nothing spooks the herd." "It sounds dangerous," Lily commented. "It can be," Dawson acknowledged. "But mostly it's just long days and short nights, dust and sore muscles." "Is that why you do it, for the challenge?" He considered her question. "Partly, mostly because it's what I know after the war." He trailed off, surprised at himself for bringing it up. "You fought?" Lily asked quietly. "Union cavalry," Dawson confirmed, the words coming reluctantly. "Enlisted in '63 after Gettysburg. Thought I could make a difference." "Did you?" The simple question carried weight. Dawson stared at the flowing water of the creek, memories threatening to surface. "No," he said finally. "I lost more than I saved." Lily was silent for a long moment. "My father fought as well," she said eventually. "He came back changed. Sometimes I would find him sitting alone in the dark, just staring at nothing." "The war does that," Dawson murmured. "Takes pieces of you that never grow back." "Is that what haunts your sleep?" The war, Dawson tensed, then forced himself to relax. "Among other things." "Would it help to talk about it?" she asked gently. "No," he said, more sharply than he intended. Then, softer, "No, some things are better left buried." Lily nodded, accepting his boundary. "Then perhaps I could sing again instead." Something in Dawson's chest loosened at her offer. "I'd like that." She smiled and began a different song, this one lighter, though still tinged with the melancholy that seemed inherent in the old Irish melodies. Dawson closed his eyes, letting the unfamiliar words wash over him, carrying away some of the tension he perpetually carried. When she finished, they sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle gurgle of the creek and the distant hoot of an owl. "I should get you home," Dawson said eventually, "and I need to get back to the ranch before anyone notices I'm gone." Lily nodded and rose, brushing off her skirt. "Will you come again?" she asked as they began walking toward town. Dawson knew he should say no. Getting involved with anyone, even just as a friend, inevitably led to questions he didn't want to answer, attachments he couldn't afford to form. But looking at Lily in the moonlight, he found himself unable to refuse. "If I can," he said, her smile was worth the risk. "I'll be here most evenings, same time." They walked back to her boarding house, and this time when they parted, Dawson felt a reluctance he hadn't experienced in years. "Good night, Lily Kerrigan." "Sleep well, Dawson Turner," she replied, and somehow it felt like a blessing. To his surprise, he did sleep well that night, the few hours remaining before dawn passing without a single nightmare. The memory of Lily's songs seemed to have erected a temporary barrier against the horrors that usually plagued his dreams. The next days passed in a blur of activity at the ranch. Dawson threw himself into the work, earning Cooper's grudging respect and the friendship of several other hands. But his thoughts frequently drifted to the creek in Carlin and the woman who sang to the stars. He managed to slip away twice more that week, riding into town after the bunkhouse had settled for the night. Each time, Lily was there, sometimes by the water, sometimes among the trees. They would talk for a while about her day teaching the children of Carlin, about the preparations for the cattle drive, about books they'd read or places they'd seen. Dawson found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. He told her about growing up in Pennsylvania, about his love of horses, about his dreams before the war of someday having his own ranch. He didn't talk about the nightmares or his brother, but Lily never pressed. Instead, she always ended their evenings by singing, her clear voice weaving a spell that somehow kept the worst of his demons at bay. On his third visit, as they walked back toward town, Lily surprised him with a question. "There's a social at the church on Saturday evening. Would you consider attending with me?" Dawson hesitated. Their nighttime meetings felt safe, separate from the rest of the world. A public outing was different. It meant acknowledging whatever was growing between them in the light of day. "I'm not much for socials," he said cautiously. "It's nothing formal," Lily assured him. "Just music, some dancing, food, the whole town comes. Including your boss, the Wilsons," she smiled, understanding his concern. "Yes, but they're not my keepers, Dawson. I'm 24 years old and perfectly capable of choosing my own companions." "People talk," he warned, "especially about schoolteachers." "Let them," she replied with a lift of her chin. I've done nothing to be ashamed of, and neither have you. Dawson knew he should refuse. Getting any more entangled with Lily Kerrigan was a complication he didn't need. In less than 2 weeks, he'd be leaving for Sacramento anyway. But looking into her hopeful green eyes, he found his resistance crumbling. All right, he agreed. What time? Her face lit up. 7 o'clock at the church. Thank you, Dawson. As he rode back to the ranch that night, Dawson tried to convince himself he was being foolish. Whatever was happening between him and Lily couldn't lead anywhere. He was a drifter with too many ghosts, and she was a respectable schoolteacher with a life in Carlin. Yet he couldn't deny the lightness in his chest when he thought of seeing her in daylight, of perhaps dancing with her. For the first time in years, Dawson Turner was looking forward to something beyond just surviving another day. Saturday evening arrived clear and mild, the last golden rays of sunset painting the mountains to the west as Dawson rode into Carlin. He'd bathed in the creek near the ranch, shaved carefully, and put on the one decent shirt. He owned, a dark blue cotton that had somehow survived his years of wandering relatively intact. The church was easy to spot, light spilling from its windows and the sounds of fiddle music and laughter floating on the evening air. Dawson hitched his horse alongside several others and stood for a moment, gathering his courage. It had been years since he'd attended any kind of social gathering. "You came," a familiar voice said behind him, and he turned to find Lily approaching. She wore a simple dress of deep green that matched her eyes, her chestnut hair arranged in a more elaborate style than he'd seen by the creek. "I said I would," Dawson replied, trying not to stare. In the lamplight, she was even more beautiful than he'd realized. Lily's smile warmed him more than any fire could have. Most men say a lot of things they don't mean. "I'm not most men," he said, offering his arm. "No," she agreed, taking it. "You certainly are not." They entered the church together, the interior transformed from its usual solemn arrangement into a festive gathering space. Benches had been pushed to the walls, creating an open area for dancing. Tables laden with food lined one side, and a small group of musicians played near the altar. The room was already crowded with what seemed like the entire population of Carlin. Dawson felt eyes turn toward them as they entered, curious glances and whispered comments following their progress. Lily squeezed his arm reassuringly. "Mrs. Wilson," she said, approaching an older woman standing near the refreshment table. "You remember I mentioned a friend would be joining me tonight. This is Dawson Turner. He's working at the Broken Spoke." Mrs. Wilson, a plump woman with shrewd eyes, gave Dawson an assessing look. "Mr. Turner. Lily's told us about meeting you. You're with the crew preparing for the drive to Sacramento, I understand." "Yes, madam," Dawson confirmed, doffing his hat respectfully. "Mr. Watts hired me on last week." "Well, any friend of Lily's is welcome here, Mrs. Wilson said, though her tone suggested some reservation. "Help yourselves to refreshments. The dancing will pick up soon, I expect." As she moved away to greet other arrivals, Dawson leaned closer to Lily. "I think your landlady is reserving judgment." Lily laughed softly. "Mrs. Wilson reserves judgment on everyone. It's part of her charm." She led him toward the refreshment table. "Are you hungry? Mrs. Dahlan's spice cake is legendary in these parts." The evening progressed more pleasantly than Dawson had anticipated. After some initial awkwardness, he found himself relaxing into the atmosphere of community celebration. Lily introduced him to several townspeople, including some parents of her students who seemed genuinely appreciative of her teaching. When the fiddler struck up a lively reel, Lily turned to him expectantly. "Do you dance, Dawson Turner?" "Not in a very long time," he admitted, "and not well even then." "It's easy to remember," she assured him, taking his hand. "Just follow my lead." Before he could protest, she had drawn him into the circle of dancers. For a moment, Dawson felt a spike of panic. Too many people, too much noise, too similar to the chaos that triggered his worst memories. But then Lily was there, her hand firm in his, her eyes locked on his face. "Breathe," she murmured. "Just look at me." He did, anchoring himself in her steady gaze as they moved through the steps of the dance. Gradually, the knot in his chest loosened, and he found himself almost enjoying the rhythm and movement. Lily was a natural dancer, light on her feet and graceful in her turns. By the time the music ended, Dawson was smiling a genuine smile that felt foreign on his face. "You're a good teacher," he told her as they moved off the dance floor. "I have a willing student," she replied, her cheeks flushed from exertion and pleasure. They took a break for refreshments, and Dawson found himself drawn into conversation with Henry Watts, who seemed surprised but not displeased to see his newest hand at the social. "Turner," Watts nodded. "Didn't take you for the socializing type. Miss Kerrigan was kind enough to invite me," Dawson explained. "Lily's a fine young woman," Watts said, his gaze shifting to where she stood chatting with a group of ladies. "Best teacher this town's ever had. My youngest boy actually enjoys school now, which is something of a miracle." "She seems dedicated to her students," Dawson agreed. "Speaking of dedication," Watts continued, "Cooper tells me you're one of the hardest workers he's seen. Says you're a natural with the more difficult stock, too." "I appreciate that," Dawson said, genuinely pleased by the compliment. "I've always had a way with horses." "We'll need that on the drive," Watts nodded. "I'm glad you joined us, Turner." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I'm glad to see you here tonight." Man needs more than work to keep him grounded. Before Dawson could respond, Watts had moved on to greet someone else. Lily returned to his side, a questioning look on her face. "Everything all right with Mr. Watts?" "Just talking about the ranch," Dawson assured her. "He seems pleased with my work." "As well he should be," Lily said. "From what I hear, you're quite the horseman." Dawson raised an eyebrow. "And how would you hear about that, schoolteacher?" she laughed. "Carlin may not be large, but news travels fast. Several of my students are children of ranch hands. They're quite impressed with the new cowboy who can calm the wildest horses." "Exaggeration," Dawson demurred, though he was secretly pleased she'd heard good things about him. The music began again, this time a slower waltz. Lily looked at him expectantly, and Dawson found himself offering his hand without hesitation. This dance was easier, just 3 simple steps repeated, but the closeness it required felt intimate in a way the reel had not. "You're doing very well for someone who claimed not to dance," Lily observed as they circled the floor. "I have an excellent partner," Dawson replied, surprising himself with the easy compliment. As they danced, he became acutely aware of her hand in his, of his other hand at her waist, of the faint lavender scent that clung to her hair. For the first time in years, Dawson felt something other than grief or guilt or emptiness, something warm and unfamiliar, yet somehow like coming home. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, he found himself drawing her slightly closer as they moved to the music. Later, as the social began to wind down, Dawson walked Lily back to the Wilsons' house under a canopy of stars. They moved slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. "Thank you for coming tonight," Lily said as they approached her door. "I know it wasn't easy for you being around so many people." "I enjoyed myself," Dawson admitted, "more than I expected to." She studied his face in the moonlight. "You're different tonight, lighter somehow." He considered her observation. "I feel different. I haven't danced or laughed like that since before the war." "I'm glad," Lily said softly. She hesitated, then added, "Dawson, I know you'll be leaving soon for the drive. But I wanted you to know that I've enjoyed our time together, both by the creek and tonight." The reminder of his imminent departure cast a shadow over the evening's warmth. "I've enjoyed it too," he said, "more than I can say." They stood in silence for a moment, the unspoken question of what happened next hanging between them. Finally, Dawson gathered his courage. "Lily, I'm not the kind of man who has much to offer a woman like you. My life isn't settled, and I carry things that—" He trailed off, unsure how to explain the darkness that lived inside him. "I'm not asking for promises, Dawson," she said gently. "I just wanted you to know that you've come to matter to me." The simple honesty of her words struck him deeply. Before he could overthink it, Dawson leaned down and kissed her a brief, gentle touch of his lips to hers. When he pulled back, Lily's eyes were wide with surprise, but she was smiling. "Good night, Lily Kerrigan," he said softly. "Good night, Dawson Turner," she replied. "Will I see you by the creek before you leave?" "Yes," he promised. "As often as I can get away." He watched her enter the house, then made his way back to his horse, his mind awhirl with conflicting emotions, joy at the connection they'd formed, fear of what it might mean. And underneath it all, the constant awareness that in less than 2 weeks, he'd be riding away from Carlin and from Lily. The days leading up to the cattle drive passed in a blur of activity. Dawn to dusk was filled with final preparations, checking supplies, shoeing horses, sorting the herd. But the nights, the precious few nights when Dawson could slip away to Carlin, belonged to Lily. They met by the creek, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in companionable silence as she sang. Dawson found himself opening up more with each visit, sharing pieces of his past he'd kept buried for years. He told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about his father's small farm, about his dreams before the war of someday having land of his own. And one night, as they sat beneath a blanket of stars, the words he'd never spoken to another soul finally came. "My brother Matthew was 16 when the war began," Dawson said, his voice low. "I was 18. Our father forbade either of us to enlist, said the war would sort itself out without Turner blood being spilled." Lily sat beside him on their usual log, not touching him but close enough that he could feel her warmth. She remained silent, giving him space to continue. "When I was 20, father died. Influenza took him in the winter of 62. Matthew was determined to enlist then. He had notions of glory, of saving the Union." Dawson's voice grew bitter. "I tried to talk him out of it, but he wouldn't listen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I enlisted too, requested we be assigned to the same unit so I could watch over him." The night sound seemed to fade as Dawson lost himself in the memory. "We were at Antietam, September 17, 1862, the bloodiest day of the war," they called it later. Over 20,000 casualties in a single day. He felt Lily's hand slip into his then, a gentle anchor to the present. "We were advancing across a cornfield when the Confederate artillery opened up. I saw the shell coming, had just enough time to shout a warning. Matthew looked at me, confused. And then, Dawson's voice broke. The shell hit right where he was standing. There wasn't even enough left to bury." "Oh, Dawson," Lily whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "That's what I see every night in my dreams," he continued hoarsely. "My brother's face, looking to me for protection, and then nothing but smoke and blood. I failed him, Lily. I was supposed to keep him safe." Lily moved closer, resting her head against his shoulder. "You were both caught in something larger than yourselves. Something terrible that neither of you created." "I should have found a way to keep him home," Dawson insisted. "Or pushed him down when I saw the shell coming." "Or Dawson," Lily interrupted gently. "You were his brother, not his guardian angel. You did everything you could by being there with him. It wasn't enough." "No," she agreed sadly. "War demands sacrifices that can never be enough, never be justified. But carrying this guilt won't bring Matthew back. It only prevents you from living the life he no longer can." Her words hit Dawson with unexpected force. He'd been carrying his guilt for so long, wearing it like armor, that the thought of setting it down felt like another betrayal. Yet there was truth in what she said. Matthew wouldn't have wanted him to spend his life haunted and alone. "I don't know how to let it go," he admitted. "The dreams come whether I want them or not." Lily was quiet for a moment, then said, "My grandmother believed that songs could carry messages to those who have passed beyond. That's why I sing here. By moving water, it helps the songs travel to where they need to go." She lifted her face to his. "Would you like me to sing for Matthew tonight?" The offer caught Dawson off guard, a lump forming in his throat at the simple kindness of it. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Lily shifted slightly away from him, facing the flowing creek. When she began to sing, it was different from any song he'd heard from her before, deeper, older somehow. Though he couldn't understand the words, the melody spoke of loss and remembrance, of love that continued beyond death's boundary. Dawson closed his eyes, letting the song wash over him. In his mind, he saw Matthew not as he had in that final moment, but as he had been in life, laughing, full of dreams and plans. The image was painful but also strangely comforting. When the song ended, Dawson found his face wet with tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. Lily's hand found his again, her touch grounding him as emotions he'd suppressed for years finally broke free. "Thank you," he whispered when he could speak again. Lily leaned against him once more. "Songs help us say things we can't find words for ourselves." They sat in silence for a long time after that, the creek's gentle gurgle and the night sounds of insects creating a peaceful backdrop. Dawson felt different, not healed, not free of his guilt, but as if a wound long festering had finally been cleaned, the first step toward eventual healing. "I leave in 3 days," he said finally. "The drive to Sacramento will take nearly a month. If things go well, we should be back by mid-July." Lily nodded against his shoulder. "Will you come find me when you return?" The question held weight beyond its simple words. Dawson knew he should be cautious, should remind her and himself that he wasn't the settling kind, that his demons made him poor company for someone as bright and full of life as Lily Kerrigan. Instead, he found himself saying, "Yes, if you'll be waiting." She lifted her head to look at him, her green eyes serious in the moonlight. "I will." The promise hung between them, fragile yet somehow more binding than any formal vow. Dawson leaned down and kissed her, no longer tentative as he had been outside her boarding house. Lily's arms wound around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Dawson pressed his forehead to hers. "I've never had anyone to come back to before," he confessed. "Then it's long overdue," Lily replied simply. The morning of the cattle drive's departure dawned clear and cool, ideal weather for moving the herd out of the valley. Dawson had said his goodbye to Lily the night before, a bittersweet parting by the creek where they'd first met. She had given him a small token, a braided leather cord with a single silver bead that had belonged to her grandfather. For protection on the journey, she'd told him as she tied it around his wrist. Now, as he mounted his horse and took his position on the right flank of the herd, Dawson touched the cord, drawing strength from the connection it represented. The drive would be challenging, long days, short nights, constant vigilance required to keep the cattle moving safely toward their destination. But for the first time in years, Dawson had something to look forward to beyond just the next day's survival. Someone waiting for his return. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. "Ready to move out, Turner?" Cooper called from his position at the front of the herd. Dawson nodded, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "Ready." With whoops and whistles, the cowboys began moving the cattle forward, the massive herd reluctantly shifting into motion. As they passed the outskirts of Carlin, Dawson found his eyes drawn to the small schoolhouse where Lily would be teaching. He thought he glimpsed a figure at the window, but they were moving too quickly for him to be certain. The first days of the drive established the pattern they would follow for weeks up before dawn, moving the herd until midday heat forced a rest, then continuing until dusk when they'd set up camp for the night. Dawson took his turns at night guard, riding the perimeter of the bedded-down herd under star-filled skies. It was during those quiet night shifts that he missed Lily most acutely. The vast silence of the range seemed to call for her songs, and sometimes Dawson found himself humming snatches of melodies she had sung, though he couldn't reproduce the haunting quality of her voice. To his surprise, the nightmares that had plagued him for years came less frequently. When they did come, they were less intense, as if the sharing of his burden with Lily had somehow diminished its power over him. On the nights when Matthew's face appeared in his dreams, Dawson would wake with a start, but instead of the usual paralysis of guilt, he found he could remember his brother with a measure of peace. The drive progressed steadily westward, crossing the arid landscape of Nevada into the more varied terrain of California. They lost a few head to accidents and predators, but generally maintained good progress. The men settled into the camaraderie that develops among those sharing hardship and purpose. Dawson found himself becoming more integrated with the crew, no longer holding himself apart as had been his habit for years. He shared stories around the campfire, joined in the occasional card game, even laughed at Cooper's terrible jokes. The change in him was noticeable enough that Watts commented on it one evening as they checked the remuda. "You're not the same man who rode into Carlin a month ago, Turner," the rancher observed. Dawson adjusted a saddle blanket before replying. "How's that?" Watts studied him thoughtfully. "When you arrived, you had the look of a man running from something. Now you seem like a man with somewhere to go back to." The accuracy of the observation startled Dawson. "Maybe I am, he admitted after a moment. Would that somewhere happen to involve a certain schoolteacher? Watts asked. A knowing glint in his eye, Dawson felt a flush creeping up his neck. Miss Kerrigan is a fine woman. That she is, Watts agreed, and if I'm not mistaken, she's taken quite a shine to you as well. He paused, then added more seriously, she deserves someone who'll treat her right, Turner, someone who'll stick around. The implicit question hung in the air between them. Dawson checked another saddle before answering. I'm not sure I know how to stick around anymore, he said honestly. Been drifting so long, it's become a habit. Watts nodded slowly. Habits can be broken. Question is, do you want to break this one? Dawson considered the question. The thought of settling in one place, of building something permanent, had seemed impossible for so many years. But now, with the memory of Lily's smile and the echo of her songs accompanying him on the trail, he found himself imagining a different future. I think I might, he said finally. Watts clapped him on the shoulder. Well then, let's get these cattle to market so you can get back and figure it out. The conversation stayed with Dawson through the remaining days of the drive. By the time they reached Sacramento, successfully delivering the herd to the buyers Watts had arranged with, Dawson had made a decision that surprised even himself. The business in Sacramento took longer than anticipated, nearly a week of paperwork, banking, and negotiations. Some of the men took the opportunity to enjoy the pleasures of the city, but Dawson kept to himself, saving his pay and avoiding the saloons and gambling houses that had often been his refuge in the past. Finally, with their business concluded, Watts gathered the men for the journey home. We made a good profit, boys, he announced. There'll be bonuses for everyone when we reach Carlin. The return journey was faster without cattle to drive, though still a significant undertaking. As they rode eastward, Dawson found his thoughts increasingly turning to Lily and the uncertain future that awaited him in Carlin. What did he really have to offer a woman like her? A lifetime of nightmares and wandering, yet something had changed during the weeks on the trail. The crushing weight of guilt he'd carried for so long had lightened, and in its place, a tentative hope had begun to grow. Perhaps, with Lily's help, he could learn to live with his ghosts rather than being haunted by them. By the time the familiar landscape of Carlin came into view, Dawson had reached a decision. He would offer Lily what he had, imperfect and damaged as it was, and let her choose whether it was enough. They rode into town late in the afternoon, dust-covered and weary from the long journey. Watts dismissed them with instructions to collect their pay and bonuses the following morning. The men dispersed quickly, most heading for the saloon or their homes. Dawson unsaddled his horse at the livery stable, then hesitated. He was filthy from the trail, hardly presentable for calling on Lily. But the need to see her, to confirm she had indeed waited as promised, overrode his concern for appearance. He made his way to the schoolhouse first, but it was empty, the day's lessons long concluded. Next, he tried the Wilsons' house, gathering his courage before knocking on the door. Mrs. Wilson answered, her expression changing from polite inquiry to recognition. Mr. Turner, you've returned with the drive. Yes, madam, Dawson confirmed, removing his hat. I was hoping to speak with Miss Kerrigan. She's not here at the moment, Mrs. Wilson informed him, her tone giving away nothing of her thoughts on his visit. She often walks by the creek after school. You might try there. The creek, of course. Dawson thanked her and turned away, his heart beating faster as he made his way through town toward the familiar spot where he had first heard Lily singing. The sun was setting as he approached the creek, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. At first, he didn't see her, and a momentary fear gripped him. What if she had changed her mind? What if the connection he'd felt had faded for her during the weeks of separation? Then he heard it faint at first, then clearer as he moved toward the stand of cottonwoods. Lily's voice, singing one of the old Irish songs that had first drawn him to her. Dawson followed the sound, moving quietly until he could see her sitting on their log, her back to him as she faced the flowing water. For a moment, he simply watched her, drinking in the sight he had carried in his memory throughout the long weeks of the drive. Her chestnut hair was loose down her back, catching the last rays of sunlight. Her simple dress was the color of summer wheat, her posture graceful even in repose. When her song ended, Dawson spoke. "I've missed your voice." Lily turned sharply, her green eyes widening as she saw him standing at the edge of the trees. For a heartbeat, she remained frozen, as if unable to believe he was really there. Then she was on her feet and moving toward him with a cry of joy. Dawson caught her as she flung herself into his arms, lifting her slightly off the ground as he held her close. She smelled of lavender and sunshine, and the feeling of her in his arms was better than any homecoming he could have imagined. "You came back," Lily said when he finally set her down, her hands still clinging to his shoulders as if afraid he might disappear. "I promised I would," Dawson replied, searching her face hungrily for any changes the weeks might have brought. She looked the same, yet somehow more beautiful than his memory had painted her. "You're thinner," she observed, concern in her voice. "Was the drive difficult?" "Long but not too difficult," he assured her. "We got a good price for the herd." Lily stepped back slightly, seeming to suddenly realize how dirty and travel-worn he was. "You must have just arrived. Have you even had a meal yet?" Dawson smiled, charmed by her concern. "I came to find you first." The simple statement brought a flush to her cheeks and a softness to her eyes that made his heart turn over. "I've been coming here every evening," she admitted, "hoping each day might be the one you returned." "I thought about you every day on the trail," Dawson told her. "Every night under the stars." They moved to sit on their log, close enough that their shoulders touched. Lily listened as Dawson recounted the journey, the challenges they'd faced, the beauty of the changing landscape, the satisfaction of successfully completing the drive, and the nightmares. She asked gently when he finished, "Did they follow you?" Dawson considered the question. "They came, but differently, less often, less powerful." He looked at her, wondering how to explain. "It was as if sharing the burden with you somehow lightened it. As if your songs traveled with me, keeping the worst at bay." Lily's smile was radiant. "I sang for you every night, you know, sent the songs west, hoping they would find you." "They did," Dawson said softly, taking her hand in his. "Lily, I've been thinking about what happens now." She tensed slightly beside him. "And what have you decided?" Dawson took a deep breath. "I've spent years running from my memories, from connections, from putting down roots anywhere. I told myself it was because I didn't deserve peace, that I had to carry my guilt as penance for failing Matthew." He turned to face her more directly. "But these past weeks, something changed. I started to think maybe Matthew wouldn't want that for me, that maybe there could be a life beyond just surviving." Hope bloomed in Lily's expression, though she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "Watts has offered me a permanent position at the Broken Spoke," Dawson said. "Year-round work, not just for the drives. He's even mentioned the possibility of a foreman position when Cooper retires next year." "That's wonderful," Lily said softly. "Does that mean you're staying in Carlin?" "I'd like to," Dawson confirmed, "but only if—" He hesitated, suddenly unsure of how to phrase what he wanted to ask. Lily squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Only if what, Dawson?" "Only if there's a chance for us," he said finally. "I know I'm not what most would consider a good prospect. I still carry ghosts, Lily. I can't promise the nightmares won't ever return, but I want to try to build something here with you, if you'll have me." The last rays of sunlight caught in Lily's eyes as she looked at him, making them shine like emeralds. "Dawson Turner, are you courting me?" Despite his nerves, Dawson found himself smiling at her directness. "I believe I am, Miss Kerrigan," rather awkwardly, but yes. "Then my answer is yes," she said simply. "I would very much like to be courted by you." Relief and joy washed through him. "Even knowing what you do about me." "About my past." Lily reached up to touch his face gently. "I care for you because of who you are, Dawson, all of you, including your past. The man who heard my singing and followed it through the dark. The man who's trying to make peace with his ghosts, not just run from them." Her words touched something deep within him, a place he'd thought long closed off. Dawson leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "Love isn't about deserving," Lily replied softly. "It's about choosing." "And I choose you, Dawson Turner, nightmares and all." The word love hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to claim it directly, but both feeling its presence nonetheless. Dawson kissed her then, trying to convey through touch what he couldn't yet fully express in words. As twilight deepened around them, they remained by the creek, talking of practical matters now where Dawson would live, how their courtship would proceed in the small town where everyone knew everyone's business, Lily's teaching position, and what it meant for their future together. The school board has strict rules about married teachers, Lily explained. If we were to eventually, that is, if things progress to that point, I would likely have to give up teaching. Dawson considered this. Would that disappoint you? You seem to love your work. I do love teaching, she acknowledged, but there are other ways to use those skills and other dreams I've held as well. What dreams are those? He asked curiously. Lily looked slightly embarrassed. It's silly, perhaps, but I've always thought I might write books someday. Stories for children, or perhaps collection of the old songs and tales my grandmother taught me. That's not silly at all, Dawson said earnestly. You have a gift with words, Lily. I can see you writing beautiful stories. Her smile was worth every mile he'd traveled to return to her. Thank you for believing in that possibility. Thank you for believing in me, he replied simply. Eventually, they walked back to town together, Dawson escorting Lily to her boarding house as he had done before the drive. This time, though, their parting held promise rather than uncertainty. Will I see you tomorrow? Lily asked as they reached her door. Yes, Dawson promised. I need to collect my pay in the morning and make some arrangements, but I'll call on you properly tomorrow afternoon, if that's acceptable to the Wilsons. Lily laughed softly. Mrs. Wilson has been surprisingly supportive, though she tries not to show it. I think she approves of your steadying influence. Me, a steadying influence, Dawson shook his head in wonder. The world has truly turned upside down. For the better, I think, Lily said, reaching up to kiss his cheek. Good night, Dawson. Good night, Lily, he replied, reluctant to leave but knowing propriety demanded it. Sleep well. As he walked away, Dawson realized with some surprise that he felt truly happy, a sensation so foreign he had almost forgotten what it felt like. The future still held uncertainties, but for the first time in years, he faced them with hope rather than dread. True to his word, Dawson called formally on Lily the next afternoon, having secured a room at a respectable boarding house in town and made arrangements with Watts for his continued employment. Mrs. Wilson received him with cautious approval, and Mr. Wilson engaged him in a lengthy conversation about cattle prices that seemed designed to assess his character and prospects. In the weeks that followed, Dawson and Lily established the rhythms of a proper courtship. He escorted her to church on Sundays, joined the Wilsons for dinner twice a week, and accompanied Lily on chaperoned walks through town. They still met occasionally by the creek, though now openly and in daylight, with Lily's reputation carefully protected. Dawson threw himself into his work at the Broken Spoke, proving himself invaluable to Watts. He saved his wages diligently, a plan forming in his mind that he wasn't yet ready to share with Lily. On his rare days off, he often rode out to explore the surrounding countryside, particularly a stretch of unclaimed land about 5 miles east of town. The nightmares still came occasionally, but their power continued to diminish. On the bad nights, Dawson would sit by his window, looking toward the creek where he had first heard Lily's voice, and find comfort in knowing he was no longer facing his ghosts alone. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the first hints of color to the aspens in the mountains, Dawson finally felt ready to take the next step. He spoke first with Watts, who listened to his proposal with increasing interest. You've thought this through, the rancher commented when Dawson had finished outlining his plan. Yes, sir, Dawson confirmed. I've been saving every penny, and with the bonus from the drive, I have enough for a start. Watts stroked his beard thoughtfully. It's a good piece of land. Water access year-round, decent grazing. You'd need to build shelter before winter sets in, though. I know, Dawson agreed. I thought I might start with something small, just enough to get through the cold months, expand in the spring when I have more time. And you'd still help with the drive next summer, of course, Dawson assured him. I'd need the income while getting established. Watts nodded, apparently satisfied. Well then, you have my blessing for whatever that's worth, and my help with the building if you need it. Some of the boys might pitch in too if asked. I appreciate that, Mr. Watts, Dawson said sincerely. Henry, the rancher corrected. After all we've been through, I think we can dispense with formalities. He gave Dawson a knowing look. Have you spoken to Miss Kerrigan about this yet? No, Sir Henry, that's my next step, assuming. Assuming she says yes to the other question you're planning to ask. Watts finished with a smile. Dawson felt heat rise in his face. Yes. Well, I can't speak for the lady, but I'd say your chances are good, Watts offered. Never seen two people look at each other the way you two do. With Watts' endorsement bolstering his confidence, Dawson made his next preparations. A trip to the small jewelry store in Elko yielded a modest ring with a single small emerald that reminded him of Lily's eyes. Then came the formal request to speak with Mr. Wilson, who listened to Dawson's declaration of intentions with appropriate gravity. You've known our Lily less than 6 months, Wilson pointed out, though his tone wasn't unkind. That's not very long to be certain of such a permanent decision. No, sir, it isn't, Dawson acknowledged. But I've lived enough to know when something is right. Lily. She brought light back into my life when I thought all the light was gone. I may not deserve her, but I promise you I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of her choice if she accepts me. Wilson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She's like a daughter to us, you know. Her happiness matters a great deal. It matters to me too, sir, Dawson assured him. More than anything. Then you have my blessing, Wilson said finally, but the choice is hers, of course. Of course, Dawson agreed, relief washing through him. Thank you, sir. With the traditional permissions secured, Dawson arranged to take Lily on a special outing the following Sunday after church. Mrs. Wilson, now firmly in Dawson's corner, helped pack a picnic lunch and suggested they might not need a chaperone just this once. The day dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather. After the church service, Dawson helped Lily into the wagon he'd borrowed from Watts and headed east out of town. Where are we going? Lily asked, curiosity bright in her eyes. I have something to show you, Dawson replied mysteriously. A place I've been visiting on my days off. They rode in comfortable conversation until Dawson turned the wagon onto a barely visible track leading toward a rise overlooking a small valley. As they crested the hill, he drew the horses to a halt and watched Lily's face as she took in the view. Below them stretched a picturesque valley, bisected by a clear stream lined with cottonwoods and willows. The grassland was dotted with aspens showing their autumn gold, and in the distance, mountains provided a dramatic backdrop against the blue sky. It's beautiful, Lily breathed, taking in the scene. Is this where you've been disappearing to? Dawson nodded, suddenly nervous. What do you think? Of the land, I mean. Lily looked at him curiously. It's lovely, but why do you ask? Taking a deep breath, Dawson reached for her hand. Because I've filed a claim on it, 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Lily's eyes widened. You're claiming land, you mean to stay permanently then? I do, Dawson confirmed. I've been saving every penny. Figured I could start with a small cabin, just enough to get through winter. Then in spring, build something more substantial. Watts has offered to sell me a small breeding herd on credit to get started. Lily was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Dawson Turner, are you telling me you're becoming a rancher? I'm trying to, he admitted. Though I'll still help Watts with his drives for the extra income until I'm established. He hesitated, then added, it's a risk, I know, might not work out, but I thought, that is, I hoped. Words failing him, Dawson reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box containing the ring. Lily's hand flew to her mouth as she realized what was happening. Lily Kerrigan, Dawson said, his voice steadier than he felt. You found me when I was lost in darkness. Your voice quieted the ghosts that haunted me. You helped me believe I could have a future again. He opened the box, revealing the emerald ring. Would you share that future with me? Would you marry me and build a life here in this valley? Tears sprang to Lily's eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Dawson, I will marry you. With trembling hands, Dawson slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the green stone catching the sunlight. It's beautiful, Lily said, admiring it, like a piece of spring in the midst of autumn. Like your eyes, Dawson told her, the first thing I truly saw after years of darkness. Lily leaned forward and kissed him, a promise sealed between them. When they parted, she looked back over the valley. Our home, she said wonderingly. If you like it, Dawson confirmed. We could build the house there, near those larger cottonwoods, good protection from winter winds close to water. I love it, Lily assured him. When can we start? I thought we might have a small ceremony before winter sets in, Dawson suggested. Nothing elaborate, just the Wilsons, Watts, perhaps a few others from town. Then we could spend the winter in my rooms in town while I work on the cabin whenever weather permits. By spring, we should have something comfortable enough to move into. Lily's eyes sparkled with plans and possibilities. I could start ordering supplies for furnishings and seeds for a garden in the spring, and Dawson laughed, his heart fuller than he'd ever thought possible. We have time, he assured her, a lifetime. They spread their picnic under an aspen tree and spent the afternoon planning their future, walking the land that would become their home. As the sun began to lower toward the western mountains, Dawson reluctantly suggested they should head back to town. The Wilsons will be wondering about us, he reminded Lily. Just a moment more, she requested. Standing in what would someday be their front yard, Lily turned her face to the golden light and began to sing not one of the old Irish songs, but something new, a melody that seemed to contain all the joy and hope she felt. Dawson stood transfixed, watching her. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that the ghosts that had haunted him for so long had finally been laid to rest. In their place was this vibrant, living woman who had chosen to share her light with him. When her song ended, Lily turned to find him watching her with such love that she caught her breath. "What was that look for?" she asked. "I was just thinking," Dawson said as he took her hand, "that I'm the luckiest man in Nevada territory." "And I'm the luckiest woman," Lily replied, squeezing his fingers. "To think that my singing in the night brought you to me. It saved me," Dawson said simply. "You saved me." They returned to town as twilight was falling, their future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Nevada sky. The ghosts of the past would never be completely forgotten, but they had been transformed from haunting presences into honored memories, no longer wielding power to destroy. As they drove back into Carlin, Dawson looked at the woman beside him and made a silent vow. To build a life worthy of her faith in him, to create a home where songs would always find welcome, and to remember always that even the darkest night can give way to dawn when love lights the way. Dawson and Lily were married on a bright October morning in the small church in Carlin. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by the Wilsons, Henry Watts and his family, the Hands from the Broken Spoke, and many of Lily's students and their parents. Lily wore a dress of deep blue that Mrs. Wilson had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a formal veil. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson kissed his bride with a sense of wonder that such happiness could be his. The townspeople of Carlin celebrated with them afterward, a community embracing the union of their beloved schoolteacher and the once solitary cowboy who had found his place among them. True to his word, Dawson worked through the winter months on their cabin whenever weather permitted, with help from Watts and several of the ranch hands. By early spring, they had a sturdy if simple home established on their land, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, built to expand as their needs and family grew. They moved to the homestead on a perfect day in April, when wildflowers were beginning to carpet the valley. Lily immediately set to work establishing a garden, while Dawson tended to the small herd of cattle that formed the nucleus of what he hoped would someday be a prosperous ranch. Their first year on the land brought challenges: a harsher than expected winter, the constant work of establishing a functional ranch, adjustments to married life for 2 people accustomed to independence. But it also brought deep joys: evening meals shared by firelight, mornings waking in each other's arms, the satisfaction of seeing their efforts literally take root in the valley they now called home. Dawson still occasionally woke from nightmares, though they grew increasingly rare. When they came, Lily would hold him and sometimes sing softly until the tension left his body and he could rest again. In turn, he supported her through moments of homesickness for Chicago and her occasional frustration at the isolation of ranch life. By their first anniversary, the original cabin had been expanded to include a proper kitchen, and a small room Lily used for writing. True to her dream, she had begun collecting and recording the old Irish songs and stories from her grandmother, supplementing them with tales gathered from their neighbors and the diverse communities of Nevada. Dawson continued to help Watts with the annual cattle drives, the income essential as they built their own ranch. With each return, his homecoming grew sweeter, Lily waiting for him with open arms and new stories of developments at their growing homestead. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Lily shared news that filled Dawson with both joy and trepidation. They were expecting a child by late autumn. The prospect of fatherhood awakened old fears in Dawson, memories of his failure to protect his brother rising to haunt him anew. "What if I can't keep our child safe?" he confessed to Lily one night as they sat on the porch of their expanding home. "What if I fail again?" Lily took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "You won't be alone in this, Dawson. We'll face whatever comes together, just as we have everything else." Her faith in him, as always, helped Dawson find courage. As Lily's pregnancy progressed, he channeled his anxiety into preparing their home, adding a nursery adjoining their bedroom, crafting a cradle from cottonwood with his own hands, ensuring the ranch was as safe and secure as possible for the new life that would soon join them. On a snowy night in November 1880, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor attended by Mrs. Wilson and the local midwife, Lily gave birth to a healthy son. As Dawson held his newborn child for the first time, tears streaming unashamedly down his face, Lily suggested a name that pierced his heart and healed it simultaneously. "I thought we might call him Matthew," she said softly. "To honor your brother." Dawson could only nod, too overcome to speak. Matthew Wilson Turner entered the world surrounded by love, a new beginning for a family built on second chances. Life settled into new patterns with a child in the house. Lily balanced motherhood with her writing, completing her first collection of stories, which she sent to a publisher in San Francisco with tremulous hope. Dawson divided his time between the growing ranch and his son, determined to be present in a way his own father, though loving, had often been too busy to manage. The nightmares receded further, replaced by dreams of the future Matthew growing strong and healthy, perhaps siblings joining him in time, the ranch prospering, Lily's books finding readers who would value the cultural heritage she worked so hard to preserve. On summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch as twilight gathered, Lily singing to Matthew while Dawson watched his family with quiet gratitude. Sometimes in those peaceful moments, he felt his brother's presence not as a haunting ghost, but as a benevolent witness to the life Dawson had finally allowed himself to build. "Do you think he knows?" Dawson asked Lily one such evening, their son sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Matthew, I mean. Do you think he knows we named our boy for him?" Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I believe he does," she said finally. "Not in a way we can understand, perhaps, but in the way that love continues beyond what we can see or touch." Dawson nodded, comforted by her certainty. "I used to think I'd never be free of those memories, the war, losing him, that I'd always be haunted. And now," Lily prompted gently. "Now I know that carrying him with me isn't the same as being haunted," Dawson replied, looking down at his sleeping son. "It's about honoring his memory by living the kind of life he would have wanted for me. For us." Lily leaned her head against his shoulder. "That night by the creek, when I first saw you watching me sing, I sensed you were carrying something heavy. I never imagined then where that meeting would lead us." "To home," Dawson said simply, encompassing in that single word all they had built together, their ranch, their family, the love that had saved him from his solitary existence. As darkness settled over their valley, Lily began to sing softly, an old lullaby that had crossed an ocean and a continent to find its place here, in this home they had created together. Dawson closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, grateful beyond words for the voice that had called to him in the night and led him back to life. The years would bring more children, a daughter named Rose 2 years after Matthew, and another son, Daniel, 2 years after that. They would bring challenges as well, drought seasons, economic hardships, the usual difficulties of raising a family in the still wild Nevada territory. But through it all, Lily's voice remained Dawson's anchor, her songs weaving through their life together, creating a tapestry of shared experiences that bound them ever more closely. The ghosts that had once threatened to consume him were transformed into benevolent guardians, watching over the family that had grown from that chance encounter by a creek in Carlin. And on quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the ranch work done, Dawson and Lily would sometimes walk down to the creek that ran through their property. There, under the vast Nevada sky, she would sing the old songs, setting them free on the moving water, not to exorcise ghosts now, but to celebrate the journey that had brought them home.